Late night in a Chicago tech tower. Most offices are dark, but the top floor glows with a cold blue light. Sophia Bennett, the 33-year-old CEO, just finished a brutal meeting. She walks out and sees him. Daniel Carter, 41, a quiet IT technician and single father. Recently, Daniel has been leaving the building very late, every single night. He shuts down his screen, grabs his backpack, and disappears into the shadows. Curious, Sophia decides to follow him. What she finds in an old neighborhood community center shocks her to her core. It wasn't a side job, it was a secret. Now, watch him closely. Daniel Carter was a man of steel, silence, and absolute reliability. At 41, his presence in the high-speed, high-stress world of aerotech systems was like a shadow. Always there, always steady, but rarely noticed. He was a senior IT technician, the man who spent his days crawling under desks and navigating complex server rooms to ensure that the digital lifeblood of the company never stopped flowing. He wore simple ironed cotton shirts, heavy work trousers, and a pair of sturdy shoes that had seen years of service. In a building full of people shouting about disruption and market dominance, Daniel was a pocket of calm. Daniel had worked for the company for over 5 years. Among the younger, more ambitious members of the IT department, he was respected but misunderstood. He was the one who could fix a catastrophic server crash with a few lines of code while everyone else was panicking. He was the one who stayed late to help a junior developer solve a logic loop, even when it wasn't his responsibility. He moved through the humming server racks like a priest in a temple, undisturbed by the heat or the noise. But Daniel was also the man who never attended the Friday night happy hours. He never joined the company softball league. He never lingered in the break room to gossip about who was getting the next promotion. Every day at exactly 5 p.m., he would usually vanish, heading straight for the elevators with a singular focus that bordered on the clinical. Daniel was a single father. 5 years ago, his world had been hollowed out when his wife, Sarah, passed away after a quiet, exhausting battle with illness. In the aftermath of that loss, Daniel's life had become a masterpiece of routine designed to protect the only thing that mattered to him, his 10-year-old daughter, Emily. He had walked away from a high-paying, high-travel role in systems architecture at a global firm because he needed to be the father who was there for the science projects, the bad dreams, and the Saturday morning pancakes. He didn't need a title on a door. He needed to be a hero in a small, warm apartment. He chose invisibility at Aerotech because it bought him presence at home. Lately, however, Daniel's routine had shifted. He was no longer leaving at 5 p.m. For the past 3 weeks, he had been staying until nearly 7:30 p.m. He would wait until most of the floor was empty, until the cleaning crews began their rounds. Then he would retreat to a terminal in the back of the lab. Some of his colleagues whispered that he was working on a secret side hustle. Others, more cynical, thought he was job hunting, looking for a way out of the maintenance life. Sophia Bennett, the 33-year-old CEO, had started to notice. Sophia was a woman of data and acute observation. She had built Aerotech from a 3-person startup into a Chicago powerhouse through sheer force of will and an obsessive attention to detail. She prided herself on knowing her staff, but Daniel Carter was a variable she couldn't quite solve. He was her most reliable technician, a man whose performance reviews were always flawless. Yet he seemed to have no desire for the corporate ladder. She often wondered if he was simply bored, or if there was a reservoir of talent he was refusing to pour into the company's success. This evening, Sophia had just finished a grueling, 3-hour negotiation with a group of impatient investors. As she walked toward the executive elevators, the office was a sea of empty desks and flickering monitors. In the far corner, she saw the glow of a single screen. Daniel was there, his back to the room, typing with a rhythmic, mesmerizing intensity. He checked his watch, closed his laptop with a sharp click, and grabbed a weathered backpack from the floor. He moved with a speed that suggested he was already late for something critical. Sophia watched the elevator doors close behind him. She looked at her own reflection in the glass wall. She realized she knew everything about the company's servers, but nothing about the man who kept them alive. On a whim she couldn't explain, a spark of human curiosity she usually suppressed, she decided not to take her private car. She wanted to know where the most invisible man in her building went when the lights went out. She didn't know that she was about to receive the most expensive lesson of her career, one that isn't taught in the halls of Harvard or Stanford. The night air in Chicago was crisp, carrying the metallic scent of coming rain and the low hum of city exhaust. Sophia kept a discreet distance, her sleek black SUV trailing Daniel's old, well-maintained pickup truck through the concrete maze of the Loop. As they headed toward the city's western edge, the landscape began to shift. The gleaming skyscrapers of the financial district, monuments to glass and ego, faded in the rearview mirror. The streets grew narrower. The lighting became sparse and flickering. They moved through neighborhoods where the brickwork was crumbling and the neon signs of corner stores buzzed with a tired, desperate energy. This was the Old City, a place where the promise of the tech boom felt like a distant, cruel rumor. Sophia felt a sharp twinge of guilt. Was Daniel struggling? Was the ghost of IT working a second job at a warehouse just to make ends meet? She thought about his salary. It was competitive. But in a city like this, competitive didn't always mean comfortable for a single parent fighting the rising cost of living. She watched the red taillights of his truck, feeling like an intruder in a world she usually only saw from the 28th floor. Daniel pulled his truck to a stop in front of a small, nondescript brick building that had once been a neighborhood library. It was now marked with a faded sign, the West Side Community Center. A few high windows were lit with a warm, yellow glow, casting long, rectangular shadows across the cracked sidewalk. Daniel stepped out of the truck, adjusted his heavy backpack, and walked toward the entrance with an energy Sophia hadn't seen in the office. He looked lighter, unburdened. Sophia parked her car a block away, her designer coat feeling absurdly out of place in the shadows of the industrial neighborhood. She walked toward the building, her heart pounding against her ribs. She reached the front of the center and paused. Through the large, slightly frosted glass windows of what looked like a converted reading room, she could see inside. The room was filled with children. There were about 12 of them, ranging in age from 7 to 14. They were sitting around a collection of mismatched, scarred wooden tables, their faces illuminated by the blue light of a dozen aging laptops. Some of the screens were cracked, some of the keyboards were missing keys, but the children were leaning in with an intensity that Sophia usually only saw in her own boardroom during a high-stakes crisis. And in the center of the room was Daniel. He had taken off his work jacket, revealing a simple gray t-shirt. He was moving from table to table, kneeling down on the hard floor to be at eye level with the kids. He wasn't giving orders. He was gesturing toward the screens with a patient grace, his face lit with a genuine, vibrant smile. He was laughing, really laughing, as he ruffled the hair of a young boy who had just successfully run a line of code. It was a transformation. The man who barely spoke in the office was now the most charismatic person Sophia had ever seen. Sophia stood in the shadows of the doorway, frozen. She watched as a young girl, no older than 8, raised her hand tentatively. Daniel hurried over, his movements patient and unhurried. He spent 10 minutes explaining a logic error, using his hands to describe how data flows like water through a pipe. The girl nodded vigorously, her eyes bright with the sudden, intoxicating clarity of understanding. Then Sophia saw Emily. Daniel's daughter was sitting at the front of the room, acting as a sort of junior teaching assistant. She was helping a younger boy navigate a basic programming interface, her small voice steady and encouraging. The bond between father and daughter was palpable, a shared mission in a room that felt like a sanctuary against the cold, indifferent streets outside. Sophia realized then that this wasn't a side hustle. There were no invoices being signed, no money changing hands. These were children from the most underserved families in the city, kids who would never, in 1,000 years, have access to the high-tech world Sophia dominated. And Daniel Carter, the quiet man who fixed her servers, was giving them the keys to that world for free. He was teaching them to code. He was teaching them that their minds were more powerful than their zip codes. Sophia felt a thick lump form in her throat. She thought about the millions of dollars her company spent on corporate social responsibility campaigns, the glossy brochures, the staged photo ops, the tax-deductible donations. And here was one man, in a faded t-shirt, doing more real-world good in a single evening than her entire PR department had done in a year. She stood there for a long time, watching the invisible man become a giant. She saw the way the children looked at him, not as a technician, but as a mentor, a teacher, a hero. She realized that the reason Daniel left so quickly at 5 p.m. wasn't because he lacked ambition. It was because he had a much larger ambition than her stock price. He was building a future, one line of code at a time. The class lasted for 2 hours. During that time, Sophia didn't move an inch. She watched as Daniel gathered the children at the end of the session. He gave a short, encouraging speech about debugging the world. He told them that every mistake was just a lesson in disguise, that the most important thing wasn't the code on the screen, but the logic in their hearts. He spoke with a level of passion and eloquence that he had never displayed in a technical briefing at the office. As the children began to pack up, laughing and shouting their goodbyes, Emily started collecting the tangled power cords. The kids swarmed around Daniel for one final group hug before they headed out to their parents waiting in the dimly lit hall. Daniel stayed until the last child was out the door. He began to wipe down the tables, a rhythmic, humble task that brought back the image of the man in the office. Sophia took a deep breath, straightened her coat, and stepped through the front door. The bell above the entrance chimed with a lonely metallic ring. Daniel didn't look up at first. "Did you forget your notebook, Marcus?" he asked, his voice warm and paternal. "No," Sophia said quietly. "But I think I forgot something a lot more important." Daniel froze. He looked up, his eyes widening in absolute stunned shock as he saw his CEO standing in the middle of a dilapidated community center on a Tuesday night. He stood up slowly, the cleaning rag still in his hand, looking as if he had been caught in a security breach. "Ms. Bennett?" Emily stopped what she was doing, her eyes darting between her father and the powerful woman in the expensive coat. She recognized Sophia from the frames in the company lobby. "What are you doing here?" Daniel asked, his voice regaining its guarded professional edge. "Is there a server emergency? I checked the logs before I left. Everything was stable." Sophia shook her head. "No, Daniel, the servers are fine. I followed you, Iktan." Daniel's face flushed a deep, embarrassed red. He looked at the aging laptops, then at the peeling paint on the walls. He looked like a man who had just been caught doing something illegal. "I see. Look, if there's a policy against using company time to prepare my lesson plans, I apologize. I've only been doing that during my lunch breaks. I never let it interfere with the uptime. I know how important those servers are to you." Sophia stepped closer, looking at the screen of the laptop nearest to her. It was running a basic Python script. "Is that what you thought I was worried about? Corporate policy?" "Daniel, I just watched you teach a 10-year-old how to solve a recursive loop using a 2012 laptop with a missing E key. It was the most impressive engineering I've seen all year." "People in our building don't usually come to this part of town without a reason, ma'am," Daniel said, his voice dropping into a resonant, honest baritone. "I didn't tell anyone because, well, it's not part of my job description. At Aerotech, I'm the guy who fixes the hardware. Out here, I'm the guy who shows these kids that they have the right to build the software." "You do this every night?" Sophia asked, gesturing to the room. "3 nights a week," Daniel replied. "The center doesn't have a budget for a tech program. Most of these laptops are refurbished units I found in the company's recycling bin. I fix them up on my own time. These kids, they have the brains, Miss Bennett. They just don't have the tools. I'm just providing the tools." Sophia looked at Emily. "And you help your dad?" Emily nodded proudly, stepping closer to Daniel's side. "I teach the little kids how to make the turtles move on the screen. Dad says we're democratizing logic, so everyone has a voice, even if they don't live in a big tower." Sophia turned back to Daniel. She felt a profound sense of shame for the internal judgments she had made. She realized that she had been judging the man by the uniform he chose to wear. while he was judging her by the opportunity she represented and finding it wanting. "Why didn't you ever mention this, Daniel?" she asked. "You've been asking for more resources in the IT department for months. You could have asked for a donation for this place." Daniel shrugged, a small, humble smile touching his lips. "I didn't want it to be a project. I didn't want a camera crew here or a press release with your name on it to meet a tax quota. These kids don't need a corporate sponsor. They need a teacher who shows up when the weather's bad. They need someone who stays after the bell rings. If I asked the company for help, it would become a metric. Out here, it's just a human connection. You can't put a KPI on a child's confidence." Sophia realized then that Daniel Carter was the most successful person she knew. He had managed to separate his value from his paycheck. He was a man who understood that true leadership wasn't about holding a microphone on a stage. It was about holding a hand in the dark. The silence in the room became heavy, filled with the hum of the old machines and the scent of floor wax. Sophia looked at the invisible man and saw a giant. She realized that her own life, for all its billions and global accolades, was incredibly small compared to the world Daniel was building in this one brick room. Sophia walked slowly around the room, touching the plastic casings of the old laptops. They were warm from the evening's use, vibrant with the energy of discovery. She saw a drawing on the wall, a picture of a rocket ship made of code, with the words "Mr. Daniel's Magic Engines" written in a child's messy script. "You changed how I see leadership tonight, Daniel," Sophia said, her voice finally losing all of its professional ice. "I've spent 10 years thinking that a CEO's job was to look at the distant horizon. I forgot that the most important view is the one from the ground. I thought success was a trophy you collected at the top, but you're proving it's a seed you plant at the bottom." Daniel stood by his backpack, looking at his boss with a mixture of confusion and a developing respect. "The horizon is important, ma'am. That's why we need people like you. But these kids, they're the ones who are going to build the ships you're planning. I just want to make sure they're ready for the launch. I'm just the ground crew. And honestly, I like the grease." Sophia looked at Daniel, really looked at him for the first time in 5 years. She saw the fatigue in his eyes, the grease under his fingernails, and the absolute unshakable integrity of his soul. She noticed the way he stood, protective of Emily, humble but unbowed. "I made a mistake, Daniel," Sophia admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "In the office, I saw you as a resource, a function of the building. I never bothered to see the man. I mocked the silence of your role, and yet, you're the one doing the real work of this city. You're building infrastructure that doesn't show up on a balance sheet, but it's the only one that will last." Daniel shook his head slowly. "It's all right, Sophia. In a building with 2,000 people, the labels make it easier to get through the day. I don't hold it against you. I just want to make sure I still have a job tomorrow, now that the CEO knows I'm a disruptive element in my spare time." Sophia laughed, a genuine, rich sound that echoed off the high rafters. It was the first time she had laughed like that in years. "Daniel, you don't just have a job, you have a partner." She looked around the room again, seeing it not as a charity case but as a laboratory of untapped potential. These kids deserve better equipment. They deserve high-speed fiber lines and tablets that don't have flickering screens. And they deserve a teacher who doesn't have to pay for the electricity out of his own pocket while the rent is late. "I've been so focused on global connectivity that I missed the disconnect 3 miles from my own office." "I told you, I don't want a PR stunt," Daniel reminded her, his voice firm and unwavering. "It's not a stunt," Sophia countered, her CEO persona returning. But this time it was focused on a different kind of mission. Aerotech is going to establish a private foundation. No cameras, no press releases, no board approval needed. I'll fund the first year myself. We're going to fully fund this center and 10 more like it across the South Side. You will be the director of the program on your own terms. You'll keep your IT role if you want it, but your primary mission will be to find the invisible talent in this city and give them a voice they can't ignore. We're going to build a pipeline of geniuses that no one else can see." Daniel was silent for a long time. He looked at Emily, who was grinning from ear to ear, her eyes reflecting the yellow light. He looked back at Sophia, "I'll do it," he said softly, "but only if the board stays out of the curriculum. I don't want these kids learning how to be employees. I want them learning how to be architects of their own lives." "Deal," Sophia said, offering her hand. As they shook hands, the air in the room seemed to shift. The Ice Queen was starting to melt, and the invisible man was finally being seen. Sophia realized that her company's greatest asset wasn't the intellectual property or the market share. It was the humanity of the people she had been ignoring. She had been looking for a solution to her company's soul in the balance sheets, but she had found it in a community center with a technician and a cleaning rag. The following Monday, the atmosphere at Aerotech was fundamentally different. There was no big announcement over the intercom. There was no internal memo about a new charitable initiative or a branding shift. Instead, a large digital board was installed in the main lobby. It didn't show stock prices or news headlines. It showed a revolving gallery of drawings from the children at the Westside Community Center. Underneath the images, a simple sentence was engraved in the glass. "The best code is written by the heart." Sophia Bennett started leaving her office at 5:30 p.m. twice a week. She didn't go to the high-end gym or the rooftop bars in the Gold Coast. She drove to the West Side. She started sitting in on Daniel's classes. Not as a CEO, but as a student. She sat in the small plastic chairs and learned how to write her first line of code from a 10-year-old boy named Marcus, who lived 3 blocks from the center. She watched as Daniel treated every child as if they were the next Steve Jobs, patiently guiding them through their frustration until their eyes lit up with victory. Daniel Carter was still the man in the blue-collar uniform. He still checked the servers and fixed the hardware. But now, when he walked through the building, people didn't just see a technician. They saw a leader. They saw the pattern man who could find the beauty in the chaos. He didn't have to hide his 5 p.m. departures anymore. He walked out the door with his head high, sometimes accompanied by Sophia, as they discussed the expansion of the Invisible Logic curriculum. One evening, as Daniel and Emily were leaving the community center after a particularly successful session, Sophia was waiting at the door. The city lights of Chicago were twinkling in the distance, a reminder of the two worlds that were finally beginning to touch. "Mr. Carter," Sophia said, nodding as he walked up. "Yes, Sophia?" "I just wanted to say thank you again," she said, her voice warm in the cool night air, "for not mopping the data, for showing me the rhythm of what really matters. I realize that my towers are only as strong as the people on the ground." Daniel laughed, ruffling Emily's hair. "Anytime, CEO. Anytime. Just remember to check the logic, not just the profit." As they walked toward their truck, Sophia watched them go. She realized that the most powerful thing a leader can do isn't to give a speech or sign a multi-billion-dollar deal. It's to be the person who holds the light steady until everyone else can see the way home. She watched the old truck drive away, realizing that Daniel hadn't just fixed her company's server issues. He had fixed the moral compass of its leader. True success isn't about how much you own. It's about how much of yourself you're willing to give away when no one is watching. Sophia Bennett drove home that night, catching the reflection of the skyscraper in her rearview mirror. For the first time in her life, the view from the ground was just as beautiful as the view from the 28th floor. She had found the heartbeat, and it was much stronger than the machine. The story of the single dad and the CEO didn't end with a merger. It ended with a quiet, powerful realization that the most important connections in life aren't the ones we plan for. They are the ones that happen when you decide to follow the truth into the shadows and realize the shadows were where the light was all along. True leadership is found in the quiet acts of kindness that happen when no one is looking. A person's value isn't defined by their job title or their clothes, but by the integrity of their actions and the depth of their commitment to others. Never underestimate the quietest person in the room. They might be the one holding the world together. If you believe that the quietest people often have the biggest hearts, subscribe for more stories like this, and tell me in the comments, have you ever discovered someone was doing something incredible in secret? How did it change your perspective?